Here is a question a Greek philosopher asked 24 centuries ago, and it still has no comfortable answer. Suppose you found a ring that made you completely invisible whenever you wanted. No one could ever see what you did, ever trace it back to you, ever hold you responsible for anything. Would you still be a good person? Would you still pay for what you take, still keep the promise no one is around to enforce, still tell the truth when a lie would cost you nothing? Or would the mask simply come off, and would you become, in private, exactly the kind of person you have spent your whole public life pretending not to be? Plato asks this question in a book written around 2300 years ago, and he asks it because he already suspects the answer most of us do not want to hear, that a great deal of what we call our goodness is not goodness at all. It is just fear of being caught. So he sets out to build an entire imaginary city from the ground up for one reason only: to find out whether justice is a real thing worth wanting for its own sake, or just a clever trick the weak invented to keep the strong in check. 20 minutes from now, you will know exactly where he lands, and you may never look at your own private, unwatched choices quite the same way again. The book is The Republic, written by Plato in Athens sometime around 375 BC, roughly a generation after the death of his teacher, Socrates. And you cannot understand why Plato wrote this book without understanding what Athens had just done to that teacher. Socrates spent his life walking the marketplace of Athens, asking ordinary, maddening questions. What is courage? What is justice? What is a good life? And cornering the city's most confident men into admitting they did not actually know. Athens rewarded him for it with a jury trial and a cup of poison, executed for corrupting the youth and questioning the gods, in the very city that prided itself on being the birthplace of democracy and free speech. Plato watched this happen to the man he loved most in the world, and he never recovered his faith in the untrained judgment of the crowd. The Republic is, in part, his answer to that trauma. If the mob can vote to kill the wisest man in Athens, then maybe the loudest voice in the room is not the same thing as the wisest one, and maybe a just society needs something sturdier than a majority vote to protect what is true. Plato writes almost everything as a dialogue, a staged conversation, usually with Socrates as the lead speaker, because for Plato, philosophy was never meant to be a lecture delivered at you. It was meant to be a fight you were pulled into, question by question, until your own comfortable assumptions gave way. Here is the whole book in one sentence. Plato sets out to prove that justice is worth having for its own sake, even if it never gets you anything, even if it costs you everything, and even if no one is ever watching to reward it. And he proves it by building an imaginary just city in words, and then arguing that a just soul is really the same design, just written smaller. But before Socrates can make his case, the book opens with the hardest possible challenge to it. A blunt, impatient sophist named Thrasymachus barges into the conversation and declares that the whole idea of justice is a con, announcing his answer to Socrates like a challenge. I proclaim that justice is nothing else than the interest of the stronger. In plain terms, what we call right and wrong is just whatever rule benefits whoever already holds the power, dressed up in noble language so the rest of us obey it willingly. That is the famous move at the center of the Republic. The city is the soul, blown up to a size we can actually see. If we can figure out what makes a city healthy and well-ordered, Plato reasons, we can read the same pattern back into a single human being and understand what makes one person's inner life healthy and well-ordered too. We will walk it in 5 beats. The ring that makes you invisible, the city built from scratch, the 3 parts of every soul, the prisoners in the cave, and the philosopher-king who must rule against his own wishes. First, the ring. Early in the book, a sharp young Athenian named Glaucon does something remarkable. He argues Plato's opposing case as hard as he possibly can. Not because he believes it, but because he wants Socrates to defeat the strongest possible version of the argument, not a weak one. And to make his case, Glaucon tells a legend about a shepherd named Gyges, who finds a magic ring in a chasm opened by an earthquake. The shepherd discovers, almost by accident, exactly what the ring can do. Jowett's translation puts it plainly: when he turned the collet inward, he became invisible. When outward, he reappeared. Once Gyges realizes what he is holding, he does not hesitate for long. He uses the ring to seduce the queen, murder the king, and seize the throne for himself, completely unpunished, because no one could ever see him do any of it. Glaucon's challenge is brutal and simple. Give that same ring to a supposedly honest man and a supposedly dishonest man, and Glaucon insists they would behave exactly alike. Because, he says, no man would keep his hands off what was not his own when he could safely take what he liked out of the market, walk into houses and lie with anyone at his pleasure, and in a word, act like a god among men. In other words, Glaucon claims that justice is never something we actually want. It is a compromise we accept only because we are too weak to get away with injustice. And the moment that risk disappears, so does our virtue. Sit with how uncomfortable that idea still is. Every anonymous comment thread, every unwatched moment, every choice you make when you are certain no one will ever know is Plato's ring in miniature, tightening on your finger. And the entire rest of this book is Socrates' attempt to answer Glaucon and prove that even an invisible man has every reason to stay good. Second, the city built from scratch. Socrates' strategy for answering Glaucon is audacious. Rather than argue about justice directly, in the abstract, he proposes building an entire imaginary city in speech, from nothing, just to watch justice take shape as it grows. A city, he says, comes into being because no single person is self-sufficient. We need farmers, builders, weavers, each contributing the one thing they do best, and the whole community becomes richer than any individual could be alone. But a simple city of farmers and craftsmen soon wants more than it needs: luxuries, comforts, more land. And that hunger for more is what drags every city toward war. So the city needs defenders, a class Socrates calls the guardians, bred and trained with almost frightening rigor from childhood, on strict diets of poetry and music and gymnastics, taught only stories that make them brave and temperate, and shielded from any tale, however famous, that shows the gods or heroes behaving badly. From among these guardians, the very best, the wisest and most self-controlled, are chosen after decades of testing to become the rulers of the city. And only they, the fully proven philosopher guardians, are trusted to rule at all. It is a strange, strict, almost unsettling design by modern standards, with property held in common among the guardians and children raised communally rather than privately. But Plato is not writing a policy proposal. He is building a diagram, a working model he can take apart in front of you, so you can watch exactly where justice lives inside a functioning whole. Third, the 3 parts of every soul. Once his imaginary city is built, Socrates makes his key move. A city is just, he argues, when each of its 3 classes does its own proper job, and does not meddle in the other's business. The producers produce, the guardians defend, and the rulers rule, each excelling at their one task instead of grasping at all three. And then comes the trick the whole book has been building toward. If a city is really justice written large, Socrates says, then a single soul must contain the very same three parts in miniature. There is the appetite in us, the hungry part that wants food, comfort, money, pleasure. There is the spirit in us, the part that feels anger, pride, ambition, the will to fight for what it loves. And there is reason in us, the part that can actually calculate what is true and good for the whole person, not just for the loudest craving of the moment. A just soul, Plato concludes, is one where reason rules, spirit backs reason up like a loyal soldier, and appetite obeys instead of running the show. Exactly the way, in his just city, the wise few govern, the brave few defend, and the many productive people are free to work without being ruled by their own worst impulses. And here, finally, is Socrates' answer to Glaucon's ring. Injustice is not getting away with something. Injustice is a soul in civil war with itself, appetite or spirit seizing the throne that belongs to reason, and that inner chaos is its own punishment, whether or not a single other person on earth ever finds out. The invisible man who steals is not free. He is a small tyranny of one, ruled by his own worst part, and no ring can hide that from himself. Fourth, the cave. To explain how most of us end up ruled by the wrong part of ourselves without even noticing, Socrates tells the most famous image in all of philosophy. Imagine, he says, human beings living in an underground den which has a mouth open toward the light and reaching all along the den. Here they have been from their childhood and have their legs and necks chained so that they cannot move. All they have ever seen, their entire lives, are flickering shadows cast on the wall in front of them by a fire behind their backs. Shadows of puppets and figures carried past. And having known nothing else, they mistake those shadows for the whole of reality. Then imagine one prisoner is freed. Jowett's Socrates describes it with real dread. When any of them is liberated and compelled suddenly to stand up and turn his neck round and walk and look toward the light, he will suffer sharp pains. It is not a gentle awakening. It hurts to be shown that everything you believed was real was only a shadow on a wall. And it gets worse before it gets better. Because if that same prisoner is then dragged bodily out of the cave altogether, up into the actual sunlight, Plato's Socrates warns, when he approaches the light, his eyes will be dazzled, and he will not be able to see anything at all of what are now called realities. The blinding light of real understanding, at first, looks exactly like blindness. Only slowly can the freed prisoner's eyes adjust enough to look at real trees, real water, eventually the sun itself, the form of the good in Plato's system, the source that makes everything else true and knowable at all. And here is the part that should sting. Plato says that prisoner's moral duty, once his eyes adjust, is to climb back down into the darkness and try to tell the others what he saw, even though they will not believe him and may even want to kill him for disturbing their comfortable shadows. Plato is writing, unmistakably, about what happened to Socrates. The teacher who saw more clearly than his neighbors was rewarded with a cup of poison for coming back down to tell them. Fifth, the philosopher-king. If reason should rule the soul, Socrates argues, then reason, meaning genuine wisdom, not cleverness, not charisma, not the loudest voice in the assembly, should also rule the city. And Socrates delivers the line that has scandalized and thrilled readers for over 2,000 years, admitting it will sound absurd before he even says it. Until philosophers are kings, or the kings and princes of this world have the spirit and power of philosophy, and political greatness and wisdom meet in one, and those commoner natures who pursue either to the exclusion of the other are compelled to stand aside, cities will never have rest from their evils. Notice what he is not saying. He is not saying clever people should rule, or rich people, or the people born to rule, or even the people who most want power. In fact, Plato insists the ideal ruler is someone reluctant to rule at all, dragged back down into the cave out of duty rather than appetite, because anyone who hungers for power is, by definition, ruled by the wrong part of their own soul, and is exactly the person who should be kept furthest from a throne. The philosopher-king is simply whoever has actually climbed out of the cave, seen the shape of the good with their own eyes, and is now willing to serve the whole city rather than their own appetite or their own pride. It is a genuinely radical claim that legitimate authority has nothing to do with birth, wealth, votes, or charm, and everything to do with having seen truly and chosen, at a cost, to come back and serve. So what does all of it add up to? Strip away the imaginary city, the guardians, the communal property, and one steady argument remains standing underneath everything Plato builds: that justice is not a bargain we strike with other people out of fear of punishment, and it is not a mask we wear because we might get caught. It is the name for a soul in the right order, with reason in charge, exactly the way health is the name for a body in the right order, and just as sickness is its own punishment, whether or not anyone else can see it, an unjust soul is already suffering, already at war with itself, long before any court ever gets involved. That is Plato's real answer to Glaucon's ring. Put the ring on, vanish completely, and you have not escaped punishment at all. You have only proven which part of your own soul was really in charge the whole time. And if it was appetite, or pride, or fear, wearing the mask of confidence, then the ring does not free you. It exposes you to the one witness you can never actually hide from, which is yourself. And the cave is not an ancient myth about ignorant strangers. It is a description of what it feels like, this week, to have a comfortable belief challenged, and to feel the genuine, physical urge to look away, rather than sit in the sharp pain of being shown something truer. Real understanding, Plato warns, does not arrive as a pleasant light bulb. It arrives at first looking exactly like being blinded. Here is the one thing to carry out of this book and into your week. You will not find a magic ring in a cave this week, but you will absolutely be handed its smaller cousins. Moments where no one is watching, where the accounting could be fudged a little, where the corner could be cut and no one would ever trace it back to you, where you could say the harsh, careless thing to someone who could never really call you out for it. Plato's whole book is built to make you notice one thing in that exact moment. The question is never whether you would get caught. The question is which part of you is about to take the wheel. The hungry part, the proud part, or the part that can actually see clearly what is good, for the whole of you, not just for the next 5 minutes. So this week, when you catch yourself in one of those small, unwatched forks in the road, try running Plato's test on yourself in miniature. Not, will anyone ever find out? But, if I did this in front of every person whose good opinion actually matters to me, is this the person I would still want them to see? That is Plato's ring turned inside out. using the very fantasy of invisibility to notice, on purpose, who you actually are when the mask is off, instead of waiting to find out by accident. Plato spends an entire imaginary city, 3 classes, 3 parts of the soul, and 1 unforgettable cave to make a single quiet case. That justice is not the price we pay for being seen. It is the shape a soul takes when reason, and not appetite or pride, is finally the one in charge. And that shape holds steady whether anyone is watching or not. If this walk through the Republic gave you something worth keeping, subscribe. A new classic every week, faithfully, in about 20 minutes. Next time, we leave the marble stowers of Athens for a world of gods disguised as swans, women turned into trees, and a river that reshapes every story it touches. Ovid's Metamorphoses. And tell me in the comments, if you had Gyges' ring for exactly 1 day, completely invisible, completely unaccountable, what is the truest thing you would actually do with it?